To me, the stories of Jesus calling his disciples are amazing stories. I mean, think about it. Jesus comes to Levi. You may know him as Matthew, sitting in a tax collector's booth. He comes to James and John, Peter and Andrew, by their fishing boats and their nets. He says to each of them, "Follow me." Now here's the part that startles me. They do it. Levi rose and followed him. Of Peter and Andrew, Matthew writes that immediately they left their nets and followed him. Wow. His call was so powerful that they just leave their past lives behind to follow Jesus. Yet their reactions are not the really shocking part of the story. His are. Jesus called them to be his disciples, to follow him. Do you want to hear something even more shocking? He has called you and me as well. So what does this calling mean? Well, first of all, it means that he wants you and me, and that in itself is amazing. I mean, think about how amazing is that he calls Levi. Levi was a tax collector. He was known as someone who betrayed his own people, who cheated them of money for the sake of the hated Romans. People despised tax collectors. No one wanted to be his friend, except maybe other tax collectors. No one, that is, except Jesus. Jesus wanted him. And that's startling. That's gracious. When Jesus calls you and me, well, Jesus calls you and me as well. And that's just as undeserved and gracious. I remember back in my dating days, I was always afraid to ask the girl out because I was afraid she'd say no. I could think of all sorts of reasons why she wouldn't want to go out with me. Well, I can think of all sorts of reasons in our relationship with the Lord, all sorts of reasons why he wouldn't want us. We are, after all, as we confess on Sundays, poor, miserable sinners. There's no good reason why Jesus should want us. In fact, there's good reason why he shouldn't want us. And yet he does. At baptism he came to you and me. Follow me, he says. I've called you by name. You are mine. For no other reason but that he is gracious and forgiving, Jesus wants you and me. Secondly, his calling to follow is a call to trust him. He calls us to follow, but he doesn't always tell us where he's taking us or what will happen. Most of the time we don't know, and we don't know those things, but the point is he does. Think of Abraham. The Lord said to Abraham, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you." Now Abram had no idea where that land was. He had no idea where God was taking him. He had no idea what would happen there. He only knew that God knew. And that was enough. When I woke up on February 24th, 1996, I expected to spend the day doing premarital counseling and getting ready for church the next morning. I didn't know that Lynn and I would soon get a phone call. My dad was having a heart attack and that we would rush over there. I didn't know that we'd spend the morning at the hospital worried. I didn't know that that day my father would die. God did. He knew that. He was about to take me on a journey of grief and pain. He knew. And as I learned, that was enough. He used that journey through grief to prepare me, to help me to be a better pastor. See, God has a higher purpose. That's the third thing about Jesus calling us. His calling means that God has a greater purpose for our lives than just making it through the day, than eating and drinking and making a living and providing for our family. St. Paul wrote to the Corinthians that Jesus died for all, that they who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and rose again. Our purpose is to follow Jesus, to live for him, to serve and love others as he has loved us. For the disciples, that meant leaving their present occupation to become Christ's apostles. But for most of us, that means you're going to stay right where you are and carry out our callings here in his service. It is said that a shoemaker once asked Martin Luther, "Now that I believe in Jesus, now that I'm a Christian, what should I do?" And Luther is said to have answered, "Make the best shoes you can." Our lives are now about living for God to his glory, not our own. Finally, to follow him means that on this journey through life, we are never alone. He's with us. You know, I personally hate going on trips alone, and I think when we were in Europe and we took those trips, it wouldn't have been near as wonderful as it was having Linda with me to share that journey with. Well, we have Jesus. He calls us to follow, and that implicit in that call is the promise, I will be with you always. He will be there to talk with in prayer, to comfort us in times of grief, to bring us back on the right path when we stray, to pick us up when we fall, to rejoice with us in the great moments of life, to lead us through all of life. That's all contained in that short call. Follow me. It's the beginning of an amazing story of your life walking with Jesus. Amen?